The desert stretched endlessly under the burning sun, dry and unforgiving. Every rock, every sand dune seemed to reflect the harshness of the land. Ethan Cole, once the most respected cowboy leader in the territory, lay alone, half buried in the sand. His shirt was torn, soaked with sweat and blood, and his hands shook from the pain that ran through his body. He had ridden hard that morning, chasing after men who had betrayed him, but he had been outnumbered, ambushed, and left for dead. The pain in his chest made every breath a struggle. He coughed, tasting the iron of his own blood, and felt the desert wind sting his face. His horse, loyal and steady for years, had fallen beside him. Its flank heaved as it struggled for one last breath. Ethan tried to reach it, but his body refused. He felt weak and small, the proud cowboy leader reduced to a man who could barely hold himself upright. He thought about the choices he had made in his life, the roads he had taken, the people he had trusted, and the one woman he could never forget. Her name came to him like a whisper on the wind, Ayanna. 20 years ago, Ethan had been young and full of dreams, wandering the plains with ambition and a restless heart. He had met Ayanna when he was still learning the ways of the land, a Comanche woman who was brave, intelligent, and full of life. She had saved him once when a river's current had nearly taken him, pulling him to safety with hands that seemed delicate but were stronger than he had imagined. She had laughed at his clumsiness, scolded him for his pride, and taught him lessons he had long ignored. He had felt a connection with her unlike anything else, a bond that promised something deeper than adventure or fame. But young Ethan had been foolish. He had chosen to chase the approval of men who only cared about gold and reputation. He had promised Ayanna he would return, that nothing could keep him away. Yet he had gone back to the towns, to the raids, to the life of a leader. He had left her behind, telling himself he was protecting her from the dangers that always followed him. But deep down he had left because of fear, because pride made him think he could do better alone. Now lying on the desert floor, his mind replayed that moment over and over. He could still see her face, the way her dark eyes had stared at him, the anger mixed with pain, the quiet hurt that he had ignored. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert. Ethan could feel the chill creeping in as the day turned to evening. His vision blurred, and every movement sent waves of agony through his body. The men who had ambushed him were long gone, leaving only the wind, the coyote calls, and the endless silence of the plains. He had no water, no shelter, no hope of immediate help. He wondered if this was how life ended, not with glory or honor, but with loneliness, pain, and regret. Yet even in his pain, he refused to give in completely. He remembered the lessons of survival he had learned in his youth. He tried to shift his weight, pressing himself against the side of a rock to shield from the wind. He thought of the small streams he had seen in the area, the hidden spots where water pooled for the animals. His mind fought against the fog of pain, searching for a way to stay alive, to drag himself to safety. Each breath was harder than the last, but he clung to the faint hope that someone somehow might come. As darkness approached, the desert took on a new character. The heat of the day vanished, replaced by a biting cold that seeped into his bones. Ethan shivered violently, wishing for even a hint of warmth. His thoughts drifted back to Ayanna again, remembering the firelight in her camp, the way she had warmed him with blankets and hot tea on a cold night so many years ago. He could almost feel that warmth now, the memory comforting him against the harsh chill. He whispered her name softly into the empty desert, a prayer, a hope, a longing that perhaps somehow she would appear. He thought about the choices he had made since leaving her. He had become a leader, respected and feared by many, but nothing filled the emptiness he had carried in his heart. He had fought countless battles, protected his men, and won fame across the territory. But all those victories felt hollow without her. Every town, every campfire, every night spent under the stars reminded him of what he had lost. The desert now seemed like a reflection of his life, vast, harsh, and lonely, yet full of hidden corners where hope could still hide. Ethan tried to recall the training he had given his men, the survival skills he had learned from both the townsfolk and the Comanche people. He knew how to stay alive, how to ration his strength, how to find hidden water sources. He pressed his hand to the sand, feeling the grit under his fingers, imagining he could dig a small hole, roll under a rock, or find some shelter for the night. Every effort was a battle against his body, which screamed in protest, but he refused to surrender completely. As he lay there, he began to dream. or perhaps remember, the small details of his life with Ayanna. The first time she had taught him to ride without fear, the first meal she had shared with him, the first quiet night under the stars where he had thought of asking her to stay forever. He remembered the songs she sang, simple but beautiful, carrying the spirit of the land and her people. He realized that he had taken those moments for granted, thinking they would always be there. Now with the desert around him, he understood their true value. Night fell completely and the stars shone brightly in the sky, distant and cold. Ethan lay still, listening to the wind whisper through the rocks and the occasional cry of a coyote in the distance. He closed his eyes and tried to focus on breathing, trying to ignore the pain. His thoughts wandered again to Ayanna, wondering where she was, what she was doing, and if she ever thought of him. He imagined her strong, independent, and wise, leading her people with courage and dignity. He wished he could see her one last time, even if only to apologize, even if only to say that he had never stopped caring. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning in the desert night. Ethan felt himself slipping in and out of consciousness. His body screamed for rest, yet his mind clung to memories and hope. He knew that if he gave up completely, he would not survive the night. He forced his eyes open, scanning the horizon, hoping for some sign of life. Perhaps a traveler, a distant campfire, or even a stranger who would lend a hand. But the desert offered no answer. Only more shadows, more emptiness, and more silence. As the cold pressed harder, he whispered one more time, his voice barely audible against the wind. Ayanna. The name floated across the sand, carrying with it all his regret, his longing, and his hope. Somewhere in the vast desert, someone who remembered the past might hear, someone who could change the course of his fate. And in that moment, despite the pain, despite the betrayal, despite the loneliness, a small spark of hope remained in Ethan Cole's heart. He closed his eyes again, listening to the night, clinging to life with the last of his strength. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath was a reminder that he was still alive, still fighting, still dreaming of redemption and reunion. The desert was harsh, but even in its cruelty, it could not take the memory of her, the woman who had once held his heart and might still hold his fate. And so under the endless sky, with the stars shining cold above, Ethan lay waiting, praying that the night would bring him more than darkness, that it might bring him the one thing he had lost 20 years ago. Far from the dry, unforgiving desert, Ayanna moved quietly through the tall grasses near the river that flowed gently through her people's land. The air smelled of water and earth, a scent she loved and had grown to trust over the years. Her hair, streaked with silver from years of life and responsibility, fell loosely around her shoulders. Her eyes, still sharp and full of quiet strength, scanned the horizon as she collected herbs for her tribe's medicine. Ayanna had grown into a wise and respected healer, a woman whose presence commanded calm and respect. Her hands, though strong from work and life, were gentle and careful, treating every leaf and root with reverence. She had seen many seasons, cared for many people, and healed countless wounds. But despite her wisdom, her heart carried the memory of one wound that had never fully healed. The memory of the cowboy she had loved, and who had left her 20 years ago. Ayanna remembered that day vividly. Ethan had been young and proud, full of ambition and energy. They had shared many nights by the fire, talking quietly while the stars sparkled above them. He had promised her he would return, that nothing could keep him away. And yet he had gone, chasing fame, gold, and a life that he thought was bigger than their love. Ayanna had cried alone under the moonlight, feeling the sting of abandonment, yet a part of her had understood his fear and pride. She had promised herself she would survive, that she would keep living, that she would honor the strength in her own heart. As she moved through the river grasses, Ayanna felt the soft wind brush her face. The desert beyond the hills was quiet, but tonight there was a sound that did not belong. At first she thought it was an animal, perhaps a coyote or a fox. But then she saw the figure slumped in the sand, half hidden in the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat. She ran closer, careful not to startle him, and saw the blood, the torn shirt, the weakness in his limbs. She knelt beside the man and lifted his face. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Ethan. The same man who had stolen her heart, who had promised and left, who had vanished from her life without a word. For a long moment she could not speak, could not move. The man who had once been her world now lay helpless at her feet, bleeding and exhausted. She could feel her emotions swirl: anger, hurt, surprise, and something she could not deny, concern. He was in danger, and despite everything, she knew she could not leave him. Her people had taught her that a healer's duty was to save life, even when the person needing help had once caused pain. Ayanna gently lifted his head, feeling how fragile he had become. His eyes fluttered open and he stared at her with confusion and recognition. "Ayanna," he whispered, his voice weak, raspy from blood and exhaustion. Her heart tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She carefully unfastened the torn parts of his shirt and examined his wounds. His chest had been cut deeply and he was losing blood fast. His arms and legs were bruised and scratched. She knew she had little time to act. Her hands moved quickly with practiced skill. She tore strips from her clothing to make bandages, cleaned his wounds as best she could with water from the small bottle she always carried, and pressed the cloth against the worst cuts. Ethan's breathing was shallow, each exhale shaky and painful. He tried to sit up, but Ayanna gently pushed him back. "Stay still," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You need to rest or you will not make it." He nodded weakly, his pride fighting against the helplessness he felt. As she worked, Ethan's mind drifted. Memories of the past came rushing back. The first time they had met by the river, the lessons she had taught him, the nights by the fire, the laughter, and the promises that had been broken. He could barely believe he was seeing her again. For 20 years he had thought he would never see her face, never hear her voice, and now here she was, saving him as she had done so long ago. His heart filled with a mixture of gratitude, sorrow, and longing. Hours passed slowly. The sky turned dark and the stars began to shimmer like tiny fires above. Ayanna continued to work, never allowing herself to think of the anger or hurt that still lingered in her heart. She focused only on keeping him alive. She whispered softly to him, encouraging him to breathe, to stay awake, to fight. "You are stronger than this," she said. "You will make it." Ethan tried to speak, tried to thank her, but his throat burned and he could not form the words. Instead, he looked into her eyes, seeing not just the woman he had loved, but the strength, wisdom, and courage she had gained in 20 years. Ayanna's tribe watched quietly from a distance, understanding the situation but trusting her completely. They knew Ethan's past, the dangers he had brought near their lands, and yet they also knew that Ayanna had the right to decide who she helped. And she had chosen to help him. She worked through the night, preparing remedies from herbs and water, creating a small camp to shelter him from the chill. Every movement she made was deliberate, gentle, and filled with care. Ethan began to feel a warmth, not from the fire alone, but from the presence of the woman who had once been his heart. As he drifted between consciousness and dreams, Ethan saw her face again and again. He remembered how her hands had felt as she guided him to ride a horse for the first time, how she had taught him to read the stars, how she had laughed when he stumbled over Comanche words. He could feel the depth of the years that had passed, and he realized with painful clarity how much he had lost. He had chased ambition and fame, but it had all led him back to the same place, lying helpless, dependent on the woman he had abandoned. Ayanna noticed his mind wandering and softly spoke to him, telling stories of the tribe, of the animals, of the lessons the land had taught her. She told him about the seasons, the rains, the fires, and the quiet moments under the sky. She told him of the lives she had touched, the people she had healed, and how the world had moved on even as she carried her memories. Her voice was steady, gentle, and full of wisdom. Ethan listened, grateful for every word, every sound, every movement. Her presence reminded him that even in the harshest desert, life could still be found, nurtured, and protected. Night gave way to early morning, and Ethan's strength slowly returned. The pain was still there, deep and aching, but the worst of it had passed. He opened his eyes fully and looked at Ayanna. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. He tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply looked at her, and she understood. She had seen enough to know that his regret was real, that his suffering had changed him, that the man before her was not the same boy who had left so long ago. She smiled faintly, a mixture of softness and strength, and said, "You are alive. That is what matters." Ethan nodded, tears welling in his eyes. He had come back to her not by choice, not by chance, but by fate, and she had chosen to save him. The years of hurt, The betrayals, the abandoned promises, they hung in the air like heavy clouds, but for now they were silent. Survival came first. Healing of hearts would follow. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the river and the plains in shades of gold and red. Ayanna and Ethan sat together by the small fire, her hands still tending his wounds. He felt a warmth that was more than physical. He felt the weight of her presence, the comfort of her care, and the unspoken forgiveness that lingered in her eyes. For the first time in 20 years, he realized that some connections never truly die. Some bonds once formed carry through time, through pain, through distance, and even through betrayal. And in this quiet moment by the river under the rising sun, Ethan knew that Ayanna had always been his home. Whether he had realized it or not, she continued her work, speaking softly, guiding him gently back to strength. And Ethan, weak but determined, clung to life, grateful for every breath, every heartbeat, every moment she gave him. The desert behind him had almost claimed him, but here, with Ayanna, there was hope. Here he could begin to face the consequences of the past, begin to seek redemption, and perhaps begin to find the love he had once abandoned. Ethan's recovery was slow. Every movement reminded him of the injuries he had suffered, and every breath was a battle. His body ached in ways he had not remembered, a reminder that youth and strength were not infinite. But Ayanna was there, steadfast and patient. She would not let him give up. Each day she moved around him with quiet determination, preparing herbal remedies, changing bandages, and ensuring he ate and drank enough to regain his strength. Ethan watched her carefully, noticing the small details he had never seen before. The way her fingers worked quickly but gently, the soft expression in her eyes, and the quiet way she commanded respect from those around her. Though he could not speak much, Ethan's thoughts wandered constantly. He thought about the life he had led in the past 20 years, the fights, the towns, the people he had lost, and the choices he had made. All of it seemed meaningless now compared to the sight of Ayanna sitting near the fire, tending to him with a focus and care that no one else had ever given. He wanted to say something, anything, to express the regret, the longing, and the deep respect he felt, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he watched her quietly, feeling the weight of the years that had passed between them. Ayanna noticed his gaze but did not comment. She had learned long ago that trust and forgiveness were not given lightly. She had chosen to save him, yes, but that did not mean she had forgotten the pain of the past. The man before her was not the same as the boy who had left her heartbroken. He carried scars in his body, and she knew he carried scars in his soul, but she also saw something else, a humility, a quiet strength, and the willingness to survive that told her he had changed. As Ethan regained more strength, he began to speak slowly, sharing fragments of the truth. He told her of the ambush, the betrayal by men he had trusted, and the harsh desert that had almost taken him. He explained the choices he had made all those years ago, trying to show her that leaving had not been an act of cruelty, but a painful decision meant to protect her. Ayanna listened silently, her face unreadable, but her eyes softened ever so slightly as she understood the depth of his struggle. The days passed, blending into one another as Ethan slowly walked the path from weakness to strength. Each day brought small victories, the ability to sit upright without pain, to take a few steps without support, to eat without assistance. The fire that Ayanna kept burning through the night became a symbol of life and warmth. At times, Ethan would close his eyes and imagine the past, the nights they had spent together under the stars, and the bond that had once tied them so tightly. He realized how much he had missed, how much he had taken for granted, and how deeply he had loved her even from afar. Ayanna continued her work, teaching him patience and humility, as she had once taught him to ride and survive in the wild. She told him stories of the tribe, of the animals, of the lessons the land had offered her in his absence. She spoke of resilience, of the importance of observing, listening, and learning from everything around. Ethan absorbed every word, knowing that these lessons were not just about survival but about understanding life itself. He had spent so long chasing the wrong things, fame, money, recognition, and now he saw that the true treasures were courage, loyalty, and connection. At night, when the fire had dimmed and the desert air grew cold, Ethan would lie beside it, listening to the sounds of the river and the distant calls of animals. He often drifted into memories, thinking of the boy he had been, the mistakes he had made, and the woman who had stayed in his heart despite the years of separation. Ayana would sit nearby, quietly keeping watch, her presence a steady reminder that he was not alone. Sometimes she would hum softly, a melody from their past, and Ethan would feel both peace and sorrow, knowing that some moments could never be fully reclaimed, yet grateful that they still existed in memory. One afternoon, as Ethan practiced walking with a staff to support himself, he stumbled and almost fell. Ayana rushed to his side, steadying him with firm hands. "You must be patient," she said gently, her voice both caring and firm. "Strength comes slowly and we cannot rush it. You survived the desert, but you must survive yourself too." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He had rushed through life before, making decisions without considering the consequences. Now he understood that healing, both of body and soul, required patience and respect for the process. Ethan also began to notice the subtle ways in which Ayana had changed over the years. She had grown taller in presence, though not in stature. Her confidence, her calm, and her quiet authority made her seem unshakable. He realized that she had carried the responsibilities of her people, guiding them through seasons of hardship, teaching the young and protecting the old. She had endured without complaint, had healed without expectation, and had remained strong even when the world had been cruel. Ethan could not help but admire her, feeling a mixture of awe and shame for his own past recklessness. As the tribe went about their daily work, Ethan began to feel a part of their world again. Though he was still weak, he was allowed to help with small tasks, carrying water, tending small animals, or assisting with light repairs. Each action reminded him that survival was not only about strength, but about contribution, connection, and purpose. Ayana observed quietly, sometimes offering guidance, sometimes allowing him to learn through action. With each passing day, he felt less like a man left for death in the desert and more like someone being given a second chance at life. The bond between them, though strained by years of absence and past pain, began to shift. Ethan's presence reminded Ayana of the past, yes, but it also offered a possibility of understanding, forgiveness, and perhaps even reconciliation. She had not forgotten the hurt he had caused, but she saw the man he had become, a man capable of regret, reflection, and growth. She allowed herself to care for him without rushing, without expectation, letting each moment rebuild trust slowly. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Ethan and Ayana sat by the river, her hand still cleaning a minor wound on his arm. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the sound of flowing water and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. Ethan's eyes followed the movement of the stars beginning to appear in the sky, and he felt a quiet gratitude for life, for survival, and for the chance to see Ayana once more. He reached out, hesitating, then lightly touched her hand. Ayana did not pull away. Instead, she allowed the touch, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had always existed between them. Words were not necessary. The desert and the years of separation had taught them both that some connections could survive time, pain, and distance. All that remained was the understanding of what had been lost and the careful steps toward what might be regained. Ethan realized that he had a long road ahead, not just to regain his physical strength, but to face the emotional truths he had avoided for decades. He would have to confront his mistakes, seek forgiveness, and earn the trust that he had once abandoned. And yet, for the first time, he did not feel fear. With Ayana by his side, guiding him, caring for him, and challenging him to be better, he felt hope. The desert behind him had tested him, almost claimed him, but it could not take this moment, the chance to survive, to learn, and to perhaps reclaim a part of the life he had lost. As night fell completely, Ethan lay beside the fire, listening to Ayana's soft breathing and the crackling of the flames. He thought about the journey ahead, knowing it would not be easy. There would be trials, dangers, and moments of doubt, but for the first time in years he felt grounded, connected, and alive. He had been abandoned, left for dead, and yet here he was, surrounded by life, hope, and the woman who had once been his everything. And in the quiet of that night, with the river flowing gently beside them and the stars reflecting above, Ethan understood something he had long forgotten, that true strength was not in the battles he had won, the towns he had led, or the reputation he had earned. True strength was in survival, in caring, in forgiveness, and in the willingness to face the past and embrace a future that could still be shaped. With Ayana by his side, he felt ready to take that first step. Ethan had regained much of his strength, though his body still carried the marks of the desert and the ambush. Each step he took reminded him of the fragility of life and the importance of caution. Ayanna watched him as he moved, her eyes sharp and full of quiet concern. She had seen many men grow strong again, but she had never seen one with the depth of regret and reflection that Ethan carried. She knew he was more than a survivor. He was a man trying to make amends, trying to become the person he had always hoped to be. The quiet life by the river was comforting, but it could not last forever. Ethan and Ayanna had spent days in routine, tending to small tasks, repairing shelters, and gathering food. The tribe went about their work, the children learning from the elders, the animals grazing peacefully. But the past does not stay buried, and danger has a way of finding even the most secluded places. One afternoon, as Ethan was helping repair a fence near the edge of the village, a scout ran toward the camp, urgency in his movements. "They are coming," the scout shouted, his voice tight with alarm. "The men who ambushed Ethan? They are heading this way." Ethan froze, a cold fear running through him, but Ayanna's hand on his shoulder brought him back. She stood tall, calm and determined, and the tribe began to prepare. Weapons were readied, barricades checked, and the children were moved to safety. Ethan felt the adrenaline surge, his instincts as a leader returning even after years of injury. The men who had betrayed him were coming, and they would not hesitate to kill. When the outlaws arrived, their horses thundering across the plain, Ethan stood beside Ayanna and her warriors. The dust rose around them, swirling in the late afternoon sun. The sight of the attackers brought back memories of past battles, of ambushes and betrayals, of moments where life had seemed unfair and cruel. Ethan's body ached, but his mind was sharp. He remembered the training, the lessons in strategy, the ways to protect those he cared for. And now, for the first time in 20 years, he was fighting not for fame, not for gold, but for something far more important, life itself, and the woman who had never left his heart. Ayanna watched him carefully, her eyes calculating every move. She knew his strength, his courage, and his weaknesses. He had grown, but he was not invincible. She whispered instructions to her warriors, guiding them as they positioned themselves to defend the village. Ethan listened, nodding, understanding that this was not a battle for personal glory, but a defense of life and family. His hands gripped his rifle, his heart steady despite the pain in his chest. The fight began suddenly. The outlaws charged, their shouts harsh and aggressive. Horses stomped the earth, dust flying in every direction. Ethan moved quickly, blocking an attacker who tried to approach Ayanna. He fired with precision, taking down the first threat, but more came, relentless and angry. The warriors of the tribe fought bravely. Guided by Ayanna's calm and wisdom, Ethan's body screamed with exertion, every step and movement a reminder of his past injuries. Yet he pressed on, driven by the need to protect her, to protect those who had shown him kindness and care. At one point, an outlaw aimed directly at Ayanna. Without thinking, Ethan stepped in front of her, taking the bullet meant for her shoulder. Pain exploded through him and he fell to the ground. The world tilted, and for a moment he thought he would die right there, in the arms of the woman he loved and had abandoned. Ayanna rushed to his side, her hands pressing against the wound, her face a mixture of fear and determination. "Stay with me," she shouted. "You are not leaving me now. Not like this." The tribe rallied around them, pushing the attackers back with courage and strategy. Ethan, weak but alive, felt the strength of their unity. He realized that this was not just a fight against men, but a test of resilience, of trust, of loyalty. He had once abandoned Ayanna, left her to face life without him. Now, in a reversal of fate, he found himself relying on her and her people for survival. And yet there was no shame in that, only gratitude and a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes in the chaos of battle. Finally, the outlaws were driven away, retreating across the plains, their shouts fading into the distance. Ethan lay on the ground, bloodied and exhausted but alive. Ayanna's hands stayed pressed to his wound, whispering softly to him, her eyes never leaving his face. "You survived," she said. "You are alive. That is what matters." Ethan nodded weakly, tears stinging his eyes. He had come close to death, yet here he was, still breathing, still fighting, still with her by his side. The night fell quietly, the battle over, but the echoes of it lingering in their hearts. Ethan's body was bruised, his chest bandaged and his hands still shaking from exertion, but he felt a sense of peace. The tribe gathered around, tending to the wounded, checking on each other and ensuring that all was safe. Ethan looked at Ayanna, seeing her calm strength and quiet authority, and realized that she had not only saved him before but had saved countless others through her wisdom and courage. In the following days, Ethan's recovery continued. He could walk more steadily now, though the memory of the bullet and the fight remained a constant reminder of his mortality. Ayanna stayed close, guiding him, supporting him, and allowing him to take responsibility for small tasks around the village. He helped repair structures, gather water, and tend to animals. Every action reminded him that life was not about glory or fame, but about contribution, connection, and responsibility. Ethan also began to speak more openly with Ayanna. He told her of the choices he had made in the past, the mistakes that had led him away from her, and the regrets that had haunted him for 20 years. Ayanna listened, not interrupting, allowing him to express the truth without judgment. She saw the sincerity in his words, the depth of his remorse, and the effort he was making to become a better man. She did not forgive immediately, but she allowed the possibility of trust to grow again, slowly, carefully, like a seed sprouting after a harsh winter. The bond between them strengthened through small moments. Ethan learned to appreciate her patience, her wisdom, and her quiet strength. He observed her interactions with the tribe, how she cared for the young, the elderly, and even the animals. He began to understand that her leadership was not just about power, but about compassion, courage, and respect. Each day he spent by her side reminded him of the person he had loved, and of the person he could still become. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red, Ethan and Ayanna sat by the river, the water reflecting the colors of the sky. The village was quiet, the aftermath of the battle leaving only calm and reflection. Ethan looked at her, feeling a deep gratitude for her presence, her care, and the second chance she had given him. He reached for her hand, and she did not pull away. The simple touch was powerful, a silent acknowledgement of their shared past, their struggles, and the possibilities that lay ahead. Ethan realized that life was fragile. That time was precious, and that love once lost could still be found if nurtured with patience and care. The desert behind him had tested him, tried to take him, but it had not succeeded. And now with Ayanna's guidance and strength, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would survive, he would heal, and he would honor the woman who had saved him, not only from the desert, but from a life of regret and emptiness. As night deepened, the stars appearing like tiny sparks in the sky, Ethan lay near the fire, listening to the gentle sounds of the river and the soft breathing of Ayanna. He thought about the journey ahead, the challenges he would face, the trust he would need to rebuild, and the courage required to confront his past. But for the first time in years, he did not feel fear. He felt determination, hope, and a connection stronger than any he had known. The outlaws might return, dangers might arise, but he knew he would face them not alone, but with Ayanna and the tribe by his side. In that quiet moment, Ethan understood something he had long forgotten. True strength is not measured by battles won or towns led, but by the courage to survive, to care, to forgive, and to embrace the chance to start again. And with Ayanna near him, guiding him, challenging him, and sharing life's small moments, he felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that together they could endure anything. The days after the battle were quiet, but full of care and rebuilding. Ethan's body still ached, yet each morning he awoke with more strength and determination. He helped the tribe repair fences, mend shelters, and gather firewood. Every small task reminded him that life was fragile, precious, and that he could no longer take anything for granted. Ayanna stayed close, guiding him, teaching him patience and letting him learn from his mistakes. Her presence was steady, comforting, and filled with quiet authority. She had endured years of hardship and solitude, and yet she now offered him hope and a second chance, even after he had abandoned her 20 years ago. Ethan often reflected on the life he had lost and the opportunities he had missed. He thought about the men he had once led, the towns he had defended, and the ambitions he had chased. All of it seemed empty compared to the calm, purposeful life of the tribe. Here, among people who respected and cared for one another, he felt something he had not felt in decades: belonging. And at the center of that belonging was Ayanna, the woman who had saved him not once but twice, and who had never truly left his heart. The two spent long hours together, sometimes in silence, sometimes in quiet conversation. Ethan shared stories of the past, of the mistakes he had made, the battles he had fought and the regrets that had haunted him for 20 years. Ayanna listened, not judging, allowing him to speak freely. She shared her own stories too, of the tribe, the lessons the land had taught her, and the times she had missed him, even when she refused to admit it aloud. Each story, each shared memory built a bridge between their past and the present, reminding them both that connections once formed could survive time and distance. As Ethan regained more of his strength, he began to walk longer distances, help with the animals, and even participate in small training exercises with the young boys of the tribe. He taught them to ride horses, to track animals, and to survive in the harsh environment of the plains. The children listened with wide eyes, amazed by the man who had endured so much and yet remained kind and patient. Ayanna observed quietly, proud of his effort and the humility he displayed. She realized that the man before her was no longer the boy who had left her heartbroken. He was someone who had grown, learned, and was willing to face the consequences of the past. Ethan also began to notice the subtle ways in which Ayanna had changed. Her strength, calmness, and wisdom were evident in every movement she made. She was more than the woman he had loved. She was a leader, a healer, and a protector of her people. He admired her deeply, feeling both respect and a renewed sense of love. For the first time in years, he felt worthy of her care, and he silently promised himself that he would never take it for granted again. One evening, as the sun set over the river, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Ethan and Ayanna rode together. The horses moved steadily, the wind in their hair, and the silence between them was filled with a sense of peace and understanding. They had faced life and death, danger and betrayal, and yet here they were, together again. Ethan felt a sense of gratitude he had never experienced before, not just for his survival, but for the chance to rebuild a bond he had once broken. As they rode, Ethan spoke softly, recounting memories from their youth, the lessons she had taught him, and the times he had taken her care for granted. Ayanna listened, occasionally smiling, occasionally shaking her head, but always present. She had waited 20 years for him to realize what truly mattered, and now he had come back not as a reckless young man, but as someone who understood the value of life, love, and loyalty. The tribe continued to thrive, and Ethan found his place among them. He helped with hunting, protected the village, and trained the young ones, earning their respect and trust. The children called him teacher and friend, and the adults began to see him as part of the family. Ayanna observed all this quietly, her heart softening as she watched him grow into a man she could trust. She realized that forgiveness was not about forgetting the past, but about seeing the change in someone and allowing them the chance to prove themselves. One day, a traveler arrived at the village bringing news of the wider territory. There were rumors of trouble, disputes over land, and dangerous men still roaming the plains. Ethan knew that danger would always be present, but he also knew that with Ayanna, her people, and the lessons he had learned, he could face it. He had survived betrayal, injury, and the harshest elements of the desert, and now he was ready to protect the life and home he had fought so hard to regain. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan and Ayanna spent more time together. They repaired homes, tended to animals, and shared quiet evenings by the fire. Their bond deepened with each shared task, each conversation, and each moment of care. Ethan often reflected on the life he had lost and the lessons he had learned. He realized that love, trust, and patience were far more valuable than wealth or fame. And Ayanna, seeing his growth and sincerity, allowed herself to hope for a future together, one that was built on understanding, respect, and shared experience. One afternoon, Ethan and Ayanna walked to the river where they had first met. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Ethan removed his hat, feeling the warmth of the sun and the calm of the river. He looked at Ayanna and said softly, "Thank you for saving me. Not just once, but twice. I do not deserve this, but I am grateful." Ayanna looked at him, her eyes steady and calm, and replied, "You survived. That is what matters. The rest will come with time." They sat by the river, watching the water flow, feeling the quiet strength of the land around them. Ethan thought about the years he had lost, the mistakes he had made, and the regrets he had carried. But in this moment he realized that redemption was possible, that second chances were real, and that love could survive even the harshest trials. Ayanna's presence reminded him that life was not only about survival, but about connection, trust, and care. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the riverbank. Ethan and Ayanna sat together in silence, feeling the bond between them grow stronger with each passing moment. They had faced danger, betrayal, and loss, yet they had come through it together. Ethan felt a sense of peace knowing that he was no longer alone, that he had found his place, and that he could begin a new life with Ayanna and the tribe. As night fell, the stars appeared in the sky, reflecting in the river and creating a sense of wonder and calm. Ethan lay near the fire, watching the stars and feeling the quiet presence of Ayanna beside him. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the desert, the betrayal, the injury, and the long years of regret. And he realized that every step, every choice, every hardship had led him back to this moment, back to the woman who had always been his heart, back to a life that mattered. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the fire and the gentle presence of Ayanna. He knew that the road ahead would still have challenges, but he also knew that with patience, care, and trust, they could face anything together. The desert had tested him, the outlaws had threatened him, and life had demanded courage and endurance. But he had survived, he had learned, and he had found his way back to love, trust, and home. Ayanna smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the firelight and the calm of the night. She reached for Ethan's hand and he took it gently, feeling the strength and warmth that had never left him even through years of absence. They sat together watching the stars, listening to the river and feeling the quiet promise of tomorrow. Ethan realized that this was more than survival. It was redemption, love, and the chance to finally live fully with the woman who had saved him and the people who had welcomed him. As the night deepened, Ethan and Ayanna remained by the fire, their hands intertwined, hearts aligned and spirits connected. They had faced death, betrayal, and time itself, and yet here they were, alive together and ready to embrace whatever the future held. The river flowed beside them, the stars sparkled above, and the desert, once harsh and unforgiving, now seemed full of possibility, hope, and life. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling gratitude, love, and a sense of peace he had never known before. He had been abandoned, left for dead, and yet he had been saved, not only by Ayanna, but by the lessons, patience, and trust that life had finally given him. In that quiet, gentle moment, Ethan understood fully that survival was not only about escaping death, but about embracing life, caring for others, and building a future worth living. He had found his redemption, his place, and his heart's home. With Ayanna by his side, guiding, teaching, and sharing life's journey, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger than the past, and ready to live fully under the endless sky.